Hey guys, Chris Siegel from DataVids here. We're going to talk about dependency injection, and I'm going to show it to you in code in Visual Studio. The concepts will apply to other languages as well, but I'm going to show it to you in Visual Studio with C# with a couple different project types. But real quickly, before we get into the code, I'm going to just quickly go over the topic itself. So the whole idea is that you're separating concerns. So you're going to break out your service, which does one thing, from your program or your class that you're going to use the service in. And just like when you pass parameters into a method, you're going to pass the service which has already been constructed by some injector code into your class. Okay? So if you've all used parameters before, so that part of it shouldn't be too new to you. What might be new is just the idea that you got an interface to define a service. The service tells you how, the interface tells the service how the service should be put together, how it should be consumed, and then the actual methodology of passing it in might be slightly new, but it's going to be incredibly easy to do, and it's a powerful concept that's going to help you move forward with .NET Core and a couple of other things like Xamarin and some other technologies. So without further ado, I'm just going to show a couple quick items from Wikipedia that I thought they put into better words than I ever could, and then we'll go right into the code, okay? All right, so jumping into Wikipedia now. I won't read you this whole thing, I promise, just two really quick parts. So from the first paragraph, instead of the client specifying which service it will use, the injector tells the client which service to use. The injection refers to the passing of a dependency, a service, into the object, a client that it would use. That is it in a nutshell. Super quick, one last sentence on the overview here. This is really good too. Dependency injection separates the creation of a client's dependencies from the client's behavior, which allows the program designs to be loosely coupled. I recommend reading the intent and the overview. All right, let's get right into the code. So in Visual Studio, I'm in Visual Studio 2019. You can create a new ASP.NET Core web application. Hit next. I'm just going to call mine test 1, 2, 3. Create. And in here, there's a couple of these we could use for this, but I'm going to choose, let's say, a MVC application. Create. So it builds a bunch of things by default. I always start in the startup and the program classes. In the startup, I'll make this larger. So if you look at the startup here, it's got a configure services section, and then down here is your pipeline that does things in this order, right? So if you come up here to the configure services, we can do services.add transient. And here's where you can pick, my interface type. So and we haven't built this yet, but we'll just define it here. So I test service, so interface definition of the test service, and then what service class is going to be defined by that interface. So we'll call it test service. I'll make that capitalized as well. And it's a method, so you've got to have your quotes there. All right, let's go ahead and define those. So let's generate interface in a new file. And I'll hit F12 to go to that file. So let's say in here we've got a method signature, right? So public string my test 1, 2, 3, and you could have several other methods in here. And let's go back now to our startup CS. As you can see, this is still underlined in red. So I think what we'll do now is right next to our test service, and I usually put these in a folder in a bigger project, of course, but let's go add new class, and we'll call it, I think we called it in the other thing, test service.cs. And this is going to implement the interface that we just did, iTest service. And the kind of cool thing about it being underlined in red here is if I had 20 methods, I could do control dot and choose implement interface, and it is going to create all those method signatures for us from the interface. I only had one, so it only does one for us. And now we can go ahead and do something. Obviously, be more than this. This is an example, but hello, I am coming from the service. Return that string. Okay. So going back to our startup, you can now see the underlined red has gone away. What we've done is we've added to our application this service, and it has been implemented here. So this would be the injector. All right. So now let's go on ahead and go to one of our controllers, since this is an MVC project. And as you can see, it's already using dependency injection by default with the logger. So let's take a look at that first. So on the home controller, it's listed out the interface iLogger, and it takes in a logger. It assigns it to a local variable, and then it can be used throughout the application. So here I could do logger.log and do something with that. All right. So now let's add our new one. So what did we call it? We called it we called it iTest service. So we'll add a comma here and specify the next service, because you can have multiple services that are injected into the same class, of course. So iTest service, local test service, and we need to have, just like they did here, a read-only, private read-only. I don't think it has to be, but let's make it read-only. iTest service, test service, and now test service equals to local test service. And it's underlined in red here, and this often happens if you hover over it. Tells you the problem. This is less accessible than the method in the logger service. So this often happens when we auto-generate things, as it builds it with the least permissions needed following the least permissions principle. But in this case, since we're consuming that service, we're going to need to go ahead and make the service public, not internal. And you can check your service method as well, but it's public and public, so we're good there. So we go to the home controller, and now the error is gone. So in our home controller here, the service has been consumed, which means we can now use it in our index controller. So why don't we go ahead and access the service here, copy, paste, and there you go, is my method, myTest123. Let's assign that to a string. And let's put that into a view bag. I use capital M for a property. Really, these two lines could obviously be combined into one. And let's go ahead and make that visible in our view bag. I'm going to go over to the view for the index controller, and in the the home controller index method index view. Let's put it in its own paragraph. If we do @HTML, since it's one of those CSHTMLs, we can do raw, which I don't always recommend. I think there may be some security concerns with doing raw if you don't, make sure your input is sanitized, but this is a demo. And then we can do HTML.viewBag. And now here it doesn't have IntelliSense, but it does work because ViewBag's like a generic or dynamic kind of thing. It doesn't really know. It allows you to put anything, which could cause a runtime error. We need one more. All right. So why don't we go ahead and run that and see what we get. Oh, there you go. Hello, I'm coming from the service. And an extra semicolon that we don't need. All right, so we've successfully created our own service, our own interface service, and done dependency injection into a MVC.NET Core controller. All right. Okay, so I know I promised I'd show more than one project type, but rather than showing you those in Visual Studio, I'm just going to direct you to a better resource. So if you go to the actual official Xamarin documentation, and then you kind of just search for dependency injection, you'll end up with this link. It may be kind of tough to find right at first, so I'll place it in the comments of this video. But Xamarin's kind of an interesting way of doing dependency injection because they have some built-in boilerplate to really help you along with it. And they really utilize those interfaces to separate the iOS from the Android and the Universal Windows platform. You can do some really nice things with that. In fact, you have to do dependency injection in Xamarin, otherwise you can't do a lot of things. So make sure you take a look at this example if you're going to do Xamarin. For Blazor, the best example I could find was just going straight to the Microsoft documentation in the .NET Core. If you find something better, please put it in the comments of this video for some of the other viewers. All right, well, hopefully you learned something today. Great topic and great audience. Take care.